Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim was born in 1486 in Cologne, within the Holy Roman Empire. He emerged as one of the most enigmatic figures of the Renaissance, known for his pursuits in theology, philosophy, medicine, alchemy, and the occult. Agrippa studied at the University of Cologne, where he was introduced to scholasticism, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonic thought. His intellectual trajectory was deeply influenced by the fusion of these systems, and he became increasingly interested in the idea of a hidden knowledge that bridged the material and spiritual worlds. Throughout his life, Agrippa held various roles: soldier, physician, legal scholar, and university lecturer. His travels across Europe brought him into contact with powerful patrons, fellow intellectuals, and both the Catholic and Protestant authorities. These experiences both enriched his understanding and deepened the contradictions within his own thought. He often found himself in precarious political and religious positions due to his controversial writings and outspoken views. One of his most significant works, 3 books of occult philosophy, first published in 1533, sought to systematize the occult sciences, which included astrology, Kabbalah, numerology, and ceremonial magic. In this work, Agrippa presented a vision of magic that was in harmony with Christian theology and Renaissance humanism. He argued that the magician, as a learned and moral person, could grasp divine truths through the study of nature and hidden correspondences. The work combined elements of classical philosophy, medieval mysticism, and Christian doctrine, reflecting Agrippa's effort to rehabilitate magic as a serious intellectual pursuit rather than a superstitious or heretical practice. 3 books of occult philosophy references ritual practices, but Agrippa does not describe his own personal magical rituals in detail. However, the rituals he discusses or systematizes fall into 3 main types: natural magic, celestial, astrological magic, and ceremonial or divine magic, each with its own kinds of rites and spiritual operations. In natural magic, Agrippa wrote about the use of herbs, stones, and animals imbued with occult properties. These items could be prepared, combined, or worn in specific ways to align with the hidden virtues of nature. It includes descriptions on how to carve a gemstone at a certain planetary hour to give it astrological potency. In celestial or astrological magic, he referred to rituals that involve aligning one's actions with the movements and influences of the planets and stars. This could include the timing of operations, the use of planetary symbols or seals, and the recitation of invocations during favorable astrological conditions. Talismans made under specific celestial configurations were a key practice in this realm. Ceremonial or divine magic involved more explicitly spiritual or theological operations. Agrippa described rituals for invoking angels, using divine names, and purifying the practitioner's soul. These rites often took the form of prayer, fasting, and the construction of magical tools or circles, borrowed partly from the Jewish Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, and older grimoires like the Key of Solomon. He emphasized moral and spiritual purity for the magician, and viewed the highest form of magic as a deeply religious and contemplative act of uniting the soul with God. Agrippa may have experimented privately in his occult praxis, but his writings mostly indicate a philosophical and theological understanding of magic, rather than practical sorcery. His tone, especially in his later works, suggests increasing caution. But this was due to the political and religious dangers of being associated with magical practices. Cornelius Agrippa drew his knowledge of the occult from a wide range of sources. In the year 1510 in Würzburg, he studied under the occult tutelage of Johannes Trithemius, the author of Steganographia. His education and exposure to esoteric thought came primarily through books, intellectual circles, and his own extensive travels across Europe. He synthesized ideas from classical philosophy, Christian mysticism, medieval magic, and Renaissance humanism. He embraced the writing of Albertus Magnus. One of his primary influences was the work of Marsilio Ficino, the Florentine scholar who translated and interpreted Hermetic and Neoplatonic texts. Ficino helped reintroduce the Corpus Hermeticum into Western thought, which emphasized the idea of a divine cosmos filled with spiritual correspondences, central to Agrippa's magical worldview. Another major influence was Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, whose attempt to unify different traditions, including Platonism, Kabbalah, and Christianity, deeply shaped Agrippa's own approach. Pico introduced Christian Kabbalah into Renaissance magic, which Agrippa would later incorporate into De Occulta Philosophia. Agrippa was also familiar with medieval magical texts, including the Picatrix, an Arabic astrological grimoire, the Key of Solomon, and other grimoires. He studied the works of Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, and Raymond Lull, all of whom explored the hidden relationships between nature, mathematics, and the divine. The majority of the Magus by Francis Barrett was collected from Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. He was strongly influenced by Kabbalistic writings, particularly those interpreted through a Christian lens, and by pseudo-Dionysian mysticism. His time spent with learned circles in Paris, Dole, Pavia, and other cities brought him into contact with theologians, philosophers, alchemists, and perhaps informal practitioners of esoteric arts. There's no record of a single occult master mentoring Agrippa directly. Rather, he acted as a Renaissance synthesizer, weaving together strands of thought from antiquity, the Islamic world, and medieval Europe, and interpreting them through a Christian philosophical framework. His learning was largely autodidactic, though shaped by the intellectual currents and teachers of his time. Although attributed to him as author, Cornelius Agrippa did not write the 4th book of occult philosophy. The so-called 4th book appeared after Agrippa's death in 1535. It includes texts like Of Magical Ceremonies and the Heptameron, which deals with angelic and planetary magic rituals. These writings differ in tone, style, and depth from Agrippa's genuine work. The Heptameron is believed to have been written by an unknown author, but is attributed to Pietro da Bano. Most scholars agree that the 4th book was likely compiled by an unknown author who used Agrippa's name to increase the book's credibility and appeal among occult readers of the time. It lacks the philosophical and theological sophistication seen in Agrippa's real writings. While it had a major influence on later ritual magic, it is not considered an authentic part of Agrippa's corpus. Despite his deep involvement in esoteric studies, Agrippa also authored De Incertitudine et Vanitate Scientiarum, on the uncertainty and vanity of the sciences, a scathing critique of all forms of human knowledge, including the very occult traditions he once championed. This paradoxical stance has led some scholars to interpret him as a skeptic or even as a satirist, while others see him as a thinker wrestling with the limitations of human reason and the dangers of spiritual pride. Agrippa was frequently in conflict with religious authorities and secular powers, and he faced accusations of heresy and witchcraft. His defense of a woman accused of sorcery and his criticisms of the Inquisition reflected his commitment to justice and his disdain for institutional corruption. The specifics of how Cornelius Agrippa died remain uncertain and are not well documented. Most historical accounts agree that he died in 1535, probably in Grenoble, France, though some sources suggest Lyon. The exact cause of his death is unknown, and the circumstances are murky, contributing to the mystique surrounding his life. It is widely believed that he died in poverty and possibly in prison, or at least under some form of official suspicion or house arrest. His conflicts with religious and political authorities, particularly the Inquisition and powerful church officials, may have played a role in his decline. His defense of a woman accused of witchcraft, his writings criticizing religious hypocrisy, and his association with occult subjects made him a target for persecution. There are also legendary embellishments that suggest he died under mysterious or supernatural conditions, but these are not supported by credible historical evidence. In truth, the lack of reliable documentation means that the details of his death, like much of his life, are partly lost to history and surrounded by rumor and speculation. Aleister Crowley mentioned Cornelius Agrippa a few times in his writings, generally with a mixture of respect and critical distance. Crowley saw Agrippa as an important figure in the Western occult tradition, particularly for his role in preserving and organizing magical knowledge, but he also believed Agrippa's work belonged to an earlier, more superstitious era. In the Book of Thoth and other writings, Crowley acknowledged Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy as a foundational text in ceremonial magic and occult philosophy. He considered it a valuable repository of esoteric theory, especially concerning astrology, Kabbalah, and the symbolic structure of the universe. However, Crowley viewed Agrippa's approach as overly burdened by Christian moralism and scholastic thinking, which he felt had limited the effectiveness and spiritual freedom of magical work. Crowley was also aware of Agrippa's later skeptical work, De Vanitate Scientiarum, On the Vanity of Sciences, where Agrippa appeared to renounce or at least question the validity of the very magical and philosophical ideas he had earlier promoted. Crowley interpreted this shift not necessarily as a betrayal, but as a reflection of Agrippa's inner conflict and the oppressive intellectual climate of his time. He sometimes suggested Agrippa had been forced to obscure or disown his true beliefs for safety. Crowley saw Agrippa as a forerunner, a necessary step in the development of Western magic, but not someone whose methods or worldview could be directly applied to his own thelemic system. Crowley was trying to create a new magical synthesis that broke free from the religious frameworks Agrippa had worked within. Yet he still placed Agrippa in the lineage of serious magicians who contributed to the evolution of occult science. Agrippa's legacy endured long after his death. His ideas influenced later thinkers in the Western esoteric tradition, including Giordano Bruno, John Dee, and the Rosicrucians. Although often maligned or misunderstood during his lifetime, Agrippa came to be seen as a foundational figure in the history of Western occultism and an emblem of the Renaissance struggle to reconcile reason, faith, and the pursuit of hidden knowledge.